Hello, class. This is your professor. And now we are moving on to chapter 17. We did chapter on the blood, chapter 19, and we talked about the structure of blood in the sense that we talked about the red blood cells, the erythrocytes, the white blood cells, the leukocytes. We talked about platelets. We talked about the function of blood to transfer oxygen and carbon dioxide in your body. We talked about the ability of hemostasis, the ability of blood platelets, and the process by which your body repairs broken blood vessels. We talked a little bit about the immune response, the neutrophils, the macrophages, the basophils, the different granulocytes and agranulocytes, which we'll get into further. But before we go in that direction, in the white blood cells, we're going to go to chapter 17, which looks like we're going backwards, but we're actually going forward. Now that we've talked about blood, now we want to talk about the system which blood is active in. And feel free, as always, to send me any questions by email, to set up a Zoom meeting with me, and to go over this in more detail. But now we get to the cardiovascular system, part one, which is the heart. So chapter 17 and chapter 18 deal with the cardiovascular system, which is obviously a very important system in the body, considering the heart and blood. We need it very much so to survive. Probably as much as we need the brain, we need the heart. It is it is just very, very important, and you'll see that in detail here. All right, so we're going to start off with an overview of the heart. The heart, well, and the cardiovascular system. So the cardiovascular system, when we say cardiovascular system, you'll sometimes see the term circulatory system, cardiovascular system. Anytime you see cardio, 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 anytime you see that prefix, think heart. Cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary, cardiac. You know, anytime you see that CARDI, think of the heart. So, what does that system consist of? Consists of the heart, the blood vessels. So, we talked a little bit about blood vessels before, but think of the veins and arteries, and those are the vessels that carry the blood throughout the body. And the blood. The blood is, remember, blood is a tissue. And remember that a, a an organ system consists of, well, an organs consist of different tissue types working together for a specific function. And an organ system is a group of organs, tissues, cells, all working together for a specific function. So blood vessels are considered an organ. Heart is considered an organ. Blood is considered a tissue, and so you put all those together and you have the organ system known as the cardiovascular system. Okay, the heart pumps blood, which carries oxygen and nutrients. We talked primarily about the oxygen. The oxygen is carried, remember, the oxygen binds to the hemoglobin in your blood, specifically the heme group in your blood. But we didn't talk much about the nutrients that are also transported in your bloodstream. They're not carried by your red blood cells, not carried by your erythrocytes, but they are transported by your blood. And this is a system of tubes and that distribute it throughout the cardiovascular system. So your heart, your blood vessels, and your blood all make up what we call the cardiovascular system. Let me not spend too much time. I don't want to waste all of your time. I know you all are probably like, these videos are a little boring at times, but I try to keep it fun, but hopefully you're laughing a little bit. All right, so let's go to let's go into the basic structures of the heart. All right, so the heart, somewhat cone shaped. We talk about the heart. Uh, we do this structure with our hands. It's a little bit of a cone shape even in this structure. That's not really the shape of the heart. It's more like uh, uh, like that. I would say more a little bit like that. But be that as it may, that's a general idea. Just remember, it's about the size of a fist. So it's about the size of your heart. There's so many songs about the heart, and if I could sing, I'd sing one right now just to get us in the mood of learning about the heart. But since I can't sing, and I can't think of one to sing, I won't sing a song right now. Plus, I don't think anybody in this class wants to hear a song right now about the heart. But when we talk about the heart in general, we tend to talk about feelings and all those kind of things, and that's primarily the brain, actually, the nervous system, your feelings and your emotions. You learn that in part one of this class. We call that the heart, but really, like I said, what the heart is there to do is to pump blood throughout our body, which is oxygen and nutrients throughout our body. That's what the heart is there for. And it also acts as has some endocrine capabilities as well. So it does play a role in our endocrine system as well. So I say all that to say it's a cone-shaped organ, slightly to the left. It's not in the center of the chest. Everybody knows it's slightly, well, not say everybody knows. Hopefully you know that it's slightly to one side of your chest, your thoracic cavity. And some more details here, technical details. Posterior. Uh, Remember, posterior to the sternum. So it's sort of behind the sternum in the mediastinum, which is that central compartment in the thoracic cavity, and it rests on the diaphragm. Remember, the diaphragm is sort of at the base of your lungs, sort of like at the base of your, it's sort of in the center of your chest. All right. When we talk about the respiratory system, we'll talk about the structure of the lungs and how that relates to the heart. They're literally right uh, right next to each other. Matter of fact, one lung is slightly smaller than the other because the heart takes up space that the lung would potentially take up space in, and the lungs also rest on the diaphragm. So they're all sort of right there in that central space, surrounded by your rib cage. And the rib cage is very important because it protects your heart and lungs and some of your other organs as well, but primarily those. That's why if someone has a chest injury, it can be so traumatic because of potentially injuring the heart or the lungs. Right, that cone shape, that apex of the cone points slightly toward the left hip, and then it has a flattened base, and it generally weighs 250 to 350 grams, about 1 pound. Okay, that's the structure of the heart. You have a wonderful. You're gonna have a whole bunch of pictures in this chapter. Just go through those. You will do a dissection on the heart this semester, so you will get to see this up close and personal. The heart that we dissect is not a human heart, but I believe it's a sheep heart. I believe we're still doing the sheep heart this term, and it's very similar in structure to the human heart. But you see how the closeness with the lungs. See how the lungs are right. This is, pull if you pull it back, the lungs and the heart are very close to each other. The heart doesn't have to work super hard to pump blood to the lungs. That's where oxygen comes in contact, where your blood comes in contact with the oxygen that you breathe in. We're going to talk about that whole process. You see right here that the heart's resting on the diaphragm, on that structure there. That's a muscular structure. The apex of the heart, that's the sort of the point that the heart makes, the little point at the end that's here in this diagram. Mediastinum is sort of the chest cavity, basically. Um, Aorta, notice that big red artery coming out of the top. Sternum, that's where your rib cage is. That's your protection, right? Right lung, left lung. Notice that you may notice in this picture a little bit, but the right lung is actually bigger than uh, the left lung because the heart takes up space that the left lung would potentially take up. All right. You notice the red and the blue, red vessels going to the blood vessels going to the heart. The blue vessels We'll talk about the difference. Blue generally means that it's deoxygenated blood. Red means that it's oxygenated blood. And so we'll talk about that difference as well. All right, so here we have the base, continuing on with the basic structure, we have the different chambers of the heart. All right, so there's four main chambers, uh, superior, right, and left atria, right? So think of those sort of, when they say superior towards the head, that means on top, and the inferior, right and left ventricles, which are basically on the bottom. Okay, so you have right atria, right ventricle, left ventricle, four chambers of the heart. Then you have this indentation known as the atrioventricular sulcus. That's the boundary between the atria and the ventricles. So between the top and the bottom, you have this sort of indentation. And these are things that you'll notice when we do the dissection. And then between the right and left ventricles, you also have this interventricular sulcus, right? So these are just the sulcus is just a way we recognize the sort of like the from the outside, the end of the atria and the beginning of the ventricle, and also the difference between ventricle on the right side and ventricle on the left side. All right, this is a transverse cut of the heart. You can see the lungs. You can see lung over here as well. You can see the heart. You can see the spine, vertebrae here. You see the sternum here in the anterior. This is the posterior. And you see the structure of the heart. So that's another way to look at it. The medical technology that we use to be able to visualize internal organs without actually cutting into somebody is amazing. And I don't know if anybody is in thinking of going into radiology or x-ray or any of that kind of technology, but uh, I've had a little research and a little study in the medical imaging, and that is some really cool science if you're interested. All right, but you know, before, 100 years ago, to see the inside of somebody, we had to cut them open. Now, well, this is just a picture, but in real life, we can do this. We can take pictures of the inside of somebody's body. Everybody knows of magnetic resonant imaging, MRI, X-rays, ultrasounds, all these things. We can see the insides of somebody and see that something is not quite right on the inside without ever cutting them open. And that's, we take that for granted because you can just go get an MRI. Well, not just go get it, but you have to schedule it and things like that. But we kind of take that for granted. But if you actually do, like, if you look and read about it, like how we got to that point, you'll see that, it's a pretty major technology. I actually saw a report of somebody who developed. I met the guy who developed the handheld ultrasound. I, he's when I was in school, uh, about 20 years ago, came and spoke to our class, and he was just telling me how they developed that technology, and it was amazing. And that was 20 years ago, or 2001. All right. All right. So this is another diagram showing you the chambers of the heart. All right. Notice it's not like a square where you have the two atria on top and the two ventricles on the bottom. It's not a perfect square. The heart has like I said, it's kind of a cone shape, kind of an odd shape. It's not like evenly shaped. So you have like the right ventricle, left ventricle here, and you can see this the right atria and left atria um, there, and you can see that it's not really evenly distributed. They're different sizes. You see the blue, that's your deoxygenated blood. You see the red, that's your oxygenated blood. And we'll talk about the different structures leading to the heart and leading away from the heart. Okay. Both right and left atria receive blood from veins. Veins. What do veins do? They bring blood to the heart. Right now, we're starting to understand the terminology. Blood drains from the atria to the ventricle. All right, so blood goes into the atria via veins. Blood goes from the atria to the ventricles. We're going to talk about the passageway from the atria to the ventricle, which is which can open and shut, and then blood goes from the ventricles, from the right ventricle to the lungs, from the left ventricle to the body, the rest of the body, right? So that's the general structure. You need to know that, right? You need to know that. Very important. You will be tested on that concept. All right. Both right and left atria receive blood from veins. Blood drains from the atria to the ventricles. Ventricles pump blood into arteries that carry blood away from the heart. So going away from the heart, arteries. Going towards the heart, veins. Very simple idea, but it can get a little confusing sometimes. You'll see this term great vessels. Great vessels are the main veins and arteries, which bring blood to and from the heart. Right. So you see sort of when we say the great vessels, sort of the bigger vessels. And I've already talked about the red is the ones that are oxygenated, carrying oxygenated blood, and the blue are deoxygenated blood. Yeah, the heart. Let me move this. Try to get myself out of the way a little bit. The heart pumps blood through two separate circuits, which I just alluded to. Which we talk about the right and left side, right? So veins bring blood to the atrium, which deliver blood to the ventricles, which then pump blood to the different circuits, right? So the right side of the heart, the right ventricle, pumps blood to what we call the pulmonary circuit. So it pumps deoxygenated, which would be blue color in these diagrams, deoxygenated blood. It pumps it to the lungs to get oxygen, all right? The left ventricle pumps blood that is oxygenated to the rest of the body. So we have what we call the pulmonary circuit, which is the right side of the heart. So it receives deoxygenated blood and then pumps it to the lungs, right? So pulmonary, right side of the heart is the pulmonary pump, and it's part of the what we call the pulmonary circuit. So permanent pulmonary arteries of the pulmonary circuit deliver oxygen poor blood that has carbon dioxide in it to the lungs. What happens? That oxygen, that blood that is deoxygenated will go to the lungs to get oxygen and also to release carbon dioxide, right? So oxygen diffuses from air and the alveoli into the blood and the pulmonary capillaries. So oxygen comes into that blood, carbon dioxide is released from that blood. Oxygenated blood will flow into your right atrium, down to your right ventricle, and then to your lungs, and to get oxygen, release carbon dioxide, and then flow to the left side of the heart, the left atrium, and the left ventricle, and then go into what we call the systemic circuit, which is being pumped throughout the entire body. Right. So this is a picture of first the pulmonary circuit. Right. So oxygen poor blood that has carbon dioxide in it, enters the right atrium, then then the right ventricle, then is pumped to the lungs to get oxygen, pumped to the lungs to get oxygen, and then it'll enter into the left atrium and left ventricle. And then it goes what we call the systemic pump. Systemic pump is the left side of the heart, which goes into the systemic circuit. So oxygen, here we have in the systemic circuit, we have the reverse happening. So oxygen diffuses
from blood into tissues, and carbon dioxide diffuses from tissues into blood. So we have oxygen-rich blood being pumped throughout the body. And when that blood gets to the different tissues in your body, the oxygen goes from your blood to the tissues in your body, and then carbon dioxide comes into your blood. So it's slowly losing oxygen and gaining carbon dioxide. Also, this blood has nutrients, and it's going to be delivering nutrients to the body, and also delivers hormones and picks up waste. So all these things are happening. The pulmonary circuit is known as the low pressure circuit. Pulmonary is the blood that's pumped to the lungs, known as a low pressure circuit, because it only has to go to the lungs. So it doesn't have to go that far. You saw how close the lungs are to the heart. The systemic circuit is called the high pressure circuit, and that's pumped via the left ventricle. That is considered high pressure because that blood has to be pumped through the entire body. So it has a long way to go, right? So that's called the high pressure circuit. All right. So know the difference between the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. Pulmonary, blood that's pumped to the lungs to get oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Systemic, blood that is pumped to the rest of the body to deliver nutrients, deliver hormones, deliver oxygen, and then to pick up carbon dioxide and pick up waste, right? Those are the main differences. This is a diagram of the systemic circuit. This is a video that you can watch when you go through these slides on your own. You can click on the button and watch the video. You can explain it further. Your heart rate helps maintain also helps maintain homeostasis, which helps control your blood pressure. We talked a little bit about this in the last chapter, but your heart plays a huge role in the rate, plays a huge role in the blood pressure and blood flow to organs, right? And that's controlled by the rate and force of your heart's contraction. My heart pumps faster, more blood is going to flow than if it pumps slower. And also, if my heart pumps stronger, if it has stronger pumps, the force of my heart's contraction, more blood is going to flow to your organs, right? So your heart plays a huge role in your homeostasis. You all know this. If you go outside and go running right now, your heart is going to increase. At least one of these, probably both. The rate will probably increase. Your heart rate will increase if you start running, because what's happening? Your muscles need more oxygen to be able to function. And so your heart starts beating faster to get more blood to those muscles. You also can get stronger pumps, especially as the heart gets, as you develop muscular endurance, as your body increases in endurance, you actually find that your heart can get stronger. And so the forces of your heart's contractions will get stronger so that it can pump more blood per pump, right? So these all play a huge role. You have this, I mentioned earlier, the heart can also act as an endocrine organ, this atrial natriuretic peptide, AMP. This is going to play a role. You're going to see this when we talk about the urinary system, the kidneys. The heart can play a role in this. AMP plays a role in lowering your blood pressure by affecting your kidneys. Your kidneys, a lot of people don't realize this, your kidneys and your heart work together very significantly. I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of insight right now. All the blood that goes through your body, and I think I mentioned this before, and remember that it picks up waste from your cells. Well, that waste doesn't get, carbon dioxide we breathe out carbon dioxide, but where does the rest of the waste go? It gets removed from your blood at your kidneys. So all your blood not only has to go through your lungs, all of your blood in the systemic circuit goes through your kidneys. And that's where it gets filtered. The waste products get filtered out, and that's where we create urine. right? So that's very important. So your kidneys and your heart have to really work together. Okay. Now, section 2 of this chapter, we're going to get into the structure of the heart in more detail. And we're going to start off by talking about what we call the pericardium. And you'll see this structure in the diagram. I think sometimes the pictures are better than the actual reading the words, but pericardium is the membranous structure surrounding the heart. You probably remember these serous membranes from part 1 of this class, right? But we have the pericardium, which is the membranous structure surrounding the heart. The outer layer, remember serous membranes are like double layered with fluid in between. We have this fibrous pericardium, which is the outer layer of the pericardium, composed of collagen bundles, make it tough, anchor the heart to the diaphragm and the great vessels. So remember, the heart is connected to right there on the diaphragm, and there's all these great vessels, which are the big arteries and veins that lead right directly into the heart. Right, this also helps protect the heart. We have the serous pericardium, which is the inner layer of the pericardium, the inner, which produces this fluid. So the heart is sort of in this like sac-like structure, the serous membranous structure. All this is, the main goal is to protect the heart. Obviously, we have the rib cage, we have some muscles, the intercostal muscles that that are part of the rib cage. All of that is protection, help protect the lungs and the heart, which, as everybody knows, even if you have never took this class, you know that those are very important organs. The serous pericardium, the inner serous membrane, produces serous fluid. You have this parietal pericardium fused to the inner surface of the fibrous pericardium, helps encase the heart. It's like a sac. It helps protect the heart, folds under itself, forms this layer, adheres directly to the heart. So this is all part of this structure that helps protect the heart. And then we have what we call the visceral pericardium, the innermost layer, also known as the epicardium, which is considered the surface of the heart. All right, so now we get to the actual physical structure of the heart, which is mainly, we basically talk about the heart in 3 layers, and the outermost layer of the actual heart is called the epicardium, right? This pericardium, this fibrous pericardium, the serous pericardium, more so the fibrous and the parietal, more so considered membranes that are outside the heart that protect the heart, but the actual epicardium is considered the most superficial, that means on the surface layer of the heart. All right, we have what we call the pericardial cavity. Right? This is between the parietal and visceral pericardia. Right, so this is between those 2 membranes. It's filled with the pericardial fluid. See, remember, whenever we see cardio, remember that's heart. So that should always ring a bell. So pericardial fluid, that's the fluid in between these, in between the layers of the pericardium. Helps decrease friction. As the heart moves, you don't want your heart bouncing up against a whole bunch of things, your rib cage, your lungs. So you have this sort of protective fluid in this double membrane that helps surround it. Okay. But then we get to what we call, I want to get down to what we call the myocardium. So we have the epicardium, which is on the outside of the heart. And then we have the myocardium. That's going to be very important. Myo, hopefully that rings a bell. Think of myosin, actin and myosin, think of muscle. That's where we get to the muscle, which is deep to the connective tissue. Up until this point, we've basically been talking about connective tissue with the pericardium, the fibrous layer, the epicardium. We've been talking primarily about connective tissue. Now we get to the muscle, which is, when people think of the heart, they think of muscle, think of the pumping. That is in the myocardium. That's so right under the epicardium is the myocardium. It's deep to the epicardium. The myocardium can consist of cardiac muscle tissue and a fibrous skeleton. All right, so it's not just the muscle. Remember cardiac. Remember, there's three types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and then cardiac. Remember, so this is a specialized form of muscle tissue. It's very important to remember. The cardiac muscle cells, we call those myocytes, right? Myo, muscle, cell, cyte is cell. And their surrounding extracellular matrix. We have this fibrous skeleton. Muscle needs something to pull on. There's not really bone per se in your heart, but we have this fibrous skeleton, which sort of gives the muscle something to pull on and gives your heart structure and also insulates the heart's electrical activity. That's going to be a huge portion of when we talk about the cardiovascular system. We're going to talk about how the heart fires. Remember, cardiac muscle is striated, but remember, it's also involuntary. You don't have to think for your heart to beat. If I think about running, I mean, if I go run, yes, my heart beats faster, but my heart beats faster without me telling it to. Okay, so remember, cardiac muscle, striated and involuntary. So it's very structured, striated, but it's also involuntary. It's a specialized kind of muscle. Remember, skeletal muscle, striated but voluntary. We have to think to move skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle, not striated, but also involuntary. So just remember those things. And if you need a review, go back. I think it's chapter 8 or chapter 6, I forget, but it's in your book. You can go back and review it. All right, and then we have the lumen of the heart, which is the lumen is the sort of the inner opening is lined by what we call the endocardium, right? So we have epicardium, the most superficial layer. Then we have myocardium, which is your muscle and your fibrous skeleton of the heart. Then we have the endocardium, which is the deepest layer, and that's basically the inside of the heart. Right, and you're going to see when we talk about the blood vessels, when we talk about the arteries and the veins, you're going to see a very similar structure as to the heart. You're going to see an outer layer, you're going to see a muscular layer, and then you're going to see an inner layer. Okay, so remember this structure of the heart because you're going to see this structure in the blood vessels. Okay, and remember, a heart is an organ. Blood vessels are also organ. You have connective tissue. You have muscular tissue primarily, right? You're also going to have some nervous tissue with the heart, not necessarily with the blood vessels, but definitely with the heart. So you have multiple tissues working together for a specific function. That makes an organ. So the heart is an organ, one of the most important organs, actually. Right, so the endocardium, the innermost layer of the heart, specialized type of simple squamous, remember simple, single layer, squamous, flat epithelium, and several layers of connective tissue with elastic and collagen fibers. The endothelial cells of the endocardium are continuous with the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels, and they share many functions. So the structure of the inside of the heart is very similar to the structure of the blood vessels. This is a diagram just showing you the inside, showing you the heart with the diaphragm, the right lung, left lung, right? We see the pericardium on the outside, the outer structure, the membrane protecting the heart. We cut a little bit deeper. We can see the layers in a little bit better. This is the heart. This is if you cut into it. You see the fibrous pericardium, the serous pericardium, which contains the fluid that sort of encases the heart, the visceral pericardium or the epicardium, which is the outside layer of the heart. You see in this diagram here, breaking it down even further, epicardium, myocardium, the muscle and the fibrous skeleton, endocardium, the inside, and that's the inside of the heart. That's going to be in contact with the blood. As we talked about before, the heart consists um, of four chambers, two atria, two ventricles. We've mentioned this before. Atria receive blood from the veins and pump blood to the ventricles through valves. Those valves are very important, right? We want the blood in the heart to go in one direction. We don't want it to go backwards. Your blood pumps in one direction. Yes, it pumps right atria, right ventricle to the lungs, left ventricle, left atria, left ventricle, through the systemic circuit, through the rest of the body. Back to the right atria, back to the right ventricle, back to the lungs, back to the left atrium, back to the left ventricle, through the body, and keep going in those circuits. We do not want it to go backwards. If it starts going the other direction, there's a problem very quickly. All right, so you have these valves which have flaps that close when the ventricles contract to keep blood from moving backwards. Contracting ventricles that eject blood into the arteries, and it goes through the two circuits, the systemic or the pulmonary circuit. You have great vessels that bring blood to and away from the heart. These are the largest in the body. This is what we call the great vessels. They're part of the blood vessels, but we call a couple of them great vessels because they connect, basically because they connect directly to the heart. That's why they're called great vessels. The closer the vessel is to the heart, the bigger it is, right? And then it gets smaller as it gets further away from the heart, just in general. Right? So you have these major systemic veins, two veins that drain majority of systemic circuit are superior and inferior vena cava. So they drain the systemic circuit. Majority of the systemic circuit, superior and inferior, superior towards the head, inferior towards the feet, vena cava. Both have large openings into posterior aspect of the right atrium, right? Right atrium is receiving blood that is deoxygenated, right? Superior vena cava drains blood from superior to the diaphragm. Inferior vena cava drains blood, deoxygenated blood from inferior to the diaphragm. Hopefully that's pretty easy to remember. Your pulmonary trunk, largest vessels in their pulmonary circuit, receive deoxygenated blood pumped from the right ventricle. All right, so pulmonary trunk, largest vessels in the pulmonary circuit, receive deoxygenated blood pumped from right ventricle. Right, so deoxygenated blood enters the right atrium, goes down to the right ventricle, and then this pulmonary trunk receives that deoxygenated blood. And where's that going? Going right to your lungs, right? Splits into the right and left pulmonary arteries, what we call the pulmonary arteries, and it brings this deoxygenated blood to right and left lungs respectively. Little note here that the inside the lungs, which we're going to go into more detail when we talk about the lungs, you have the pulmonary capillaries, and that's where gases are exchanged, where oxygen is brought into the blood, carbon dioxide is released from the blood. Your oxygenated blood in the pulmonary capillaries returns to the heart via the pulmonary veins. Veins bringing blood towards the heart. Most people have four, two from each lung. So these pulmonary veins bring blood that has oxygen now to the left atrium. And then the aorta, which is usually the one that everybody's heard of, supplies entire systemic circuit with oxygenated blood. So pumping out of the left ventricle to the rest of the body, the first major blood vessel is the aorta, largest and thickest artery in the systemic circuit and the entire body. So it comes from the left ventricle as an ascending aorta, then curves to the left and makes a U-turn as the aortic arch, and that blood's going to the rest of the body. It's going to the systemic circuit. And sometimes seeing it is a little bit easier, right? So superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, coming from inferior, below the diaphragm, above the diaphragm, respectively, going into the right atria. This is your right pulmonary veins, left pulmonary veins going into the left ventricle. This is your aorta. So that's blood being pumped out of your left ventricle. I mean, the right pulmonary and left pulmonary veins go into your left atrium. That's your oxygenated blood. That's why they're red. The aortic arch, that's your major artery, biggest in the body, being pumped looks like, I know the left ventricle is down here, but it pumps up through this aortic arch, and that's going to the rest of the body. Pulmonary artery, this is blood being pumped out of your right ventricle to the lungs to go get oxygen, right? So these are all different parts of the heart, and you'll see this all when we do our dissection. This is what it looks like. Not as pretty as the picture with all the nice colors, but this is what it looks like. We're going to talk about really quickly, really soon, we're going to talk about the coronary arteries. And that's going to be these blood vessels that you see on the heart, like sort of resting on the heart. That's going to be very important part of the blood supply directly to the heart. Remember, the heart needs blood too. And this is another diagram just showing you the different structures. And it is, when you see it in a picture here or cadaver picture or diagram, it definitely, can be a little tricky to understand. Just keep going through it. But it is really good when we go through it in lab. And this is why you do this dissection in lab, because seeing it in a diagram is one thing, but actually putting your fingers, having it in your hands, you can actually put your fingers into these different structures, of course, with gloves on and with a mask on, safety first. And you can feel it, and you can see how the heart works. And it's an amazing organ. I'm a little biased because I'm teaching anesthesiology, but okay. So now we have a few more structures of the heart to sort of break down and understand. As we get into the two atria, the two ventricles, the right, the left atria, the right, the left ventricles, we need to understand there are differences between the two, right? So the ventricles are larger than the atria. Notice the atria just have to receive blood and then pump it to the ventricles. The blood doesn't have to go very far, so they don't have to be as big or as strong. The ventricle, remember, the right ventricle is pumping blood to the lungs. The left ventricle, pulmonary circuit, the left ventricle is pumping blood through the aorta and eventually to the rest of the body, the systemic circuit. So they're pumping blood further distances. And so they are stronger, thicker walls. Remember that strength is partly due to more musculature, the myocardia. Remember that second layer of the heart, that inner layer of the heart. Remember the epicardium on the outside, the most superficial layer, myocardium. The second layer, deep to the epicardium, right? The atria themselves are also not symmetrical. The right atrium is larger, not stronger, but larger, thinner walled. That's why it has less musculature, and more anterior. So anterior towards the front, posterior towards the back than the left atrium. Left atrium is thicker walled. I mean, that's because of the muscle. Somewhat smaller, a little bit smaller, located posteriorly, slightly posterior side of the heart, and makes up much of the heart's base, that cone, that pointy shape in the heart. Uh, each atrium has a muscular pouch. Um, that muscular pouch, the auricle, you'll see this in the structure when you do the dissection. Um, you also have these pectinate muscles, muscular ridges on the anterior side of the internal surface of the right atrium. Left atrium is mostly formed by the pulmonary veins. Remember, the left atrium receives blood from the lungs, so most of the structure is formed by the pulmonary veins. You see this interatrial septum, which is a wall that separates the left and the right. And this structure called the fossa ovalis, small indentation in the septum, the wall between the two atria, which is a remnant of the foramen ovale, which is part of the fetal heart. So your heart actually changes from when you were a fetus, when you were in your mother's womb. There's actually changes made to the heart that pump. We'll talk about this when we get to chapters 26 and 27, I believe, when we talk about the formation of the fetus. Remember, when your body's developing inside of your mother, all of your blood is basically coming from your mother, and that blood is not necessarily pumping. It's not pumping through the child, but it's pumping. Its nutrients are crossing over, and its oxygen is crossing over from the mother to the child. The actual blood is kept separate, but you have nutrients that are transferred in between. So your heart is your own heart has a little bit different function as a fetus, and then once you're born, obviously your heart has to function on its own. It has to do all the work, and so you'll see that you'll see the changes that happen. The ventricles are also asymmetrical. The right and left are not the same. Right ventricle is wider and thinner. Left ventricle is much stronger. I think I said on the last slide, I said something about ventricles, and I meant to keep that just about the atria. Sometimes even us professors get a little confused with our words, but the right ventricle has to pump blood just to the pulmonary circuit. Therefore, it's the lower pressure circuit. Therefore, it can be thinner, less musculature, whereas the left ventricle pumps to the systemic circuit, which is much stronger. All right, so the left ventricle has to work harder than the right, therefore has greater muscle mass, as you see highlighted here. Internally, both ventricles have ridged surfaces created by irregular protrusions of cardiac muscle tissue, a lot of cardiac muscle tissue. You'll see right here on this 1, 2, 3, this fourth bullet point, each ventricle also contains finger-like projections of muscle, papillary muscles attached by tendon-like cords, your chordae tendineae, to valves between the atria and ventricle. This is going to be important, even though I didn't highlight it. This is important. These are what are known as your heartstrings, and they help control the opening and closing of the valves, which are very important. Remember, I said your blood wants to only flow in one direction, which is very important. You also have an interventricular septum, right? Just like with the atria, you have a septum between the right and left atria. You have a septum between the right and left ventricle. All right, so this is thick muscular wall separates the right and left ventricles. Remember, we don't want blood flowing directly between the right and left ventricle. The right ventricle blood needs to go to the lungs. The left ventricle blood needs to go to the body. We don't want blood flowing between those. So it's a thick wall between the two to keep them separate. All right, this is the structure. You see this nice, beautiful diagram. Remember, as you know, it doesn't look this clean cut inside the body, but this is a good general idea. They've given it a nice color with the blue and the red. The left ventricle, thicker wall, right ventricle, thinner wall. You can see that. The auricles on the atria, and some of the arteries, differences in the shapes. Here's another diagram, and we're going to talk about these valves. See this pulmonary valve here, tricuspid valve. See 1, 2, 3 parts to it. These are the heartstrings I was talking about, the chordae tendineae, and the papillary muscles, right? Remember, that's chordae tendineae, which if I can go back to the slide just for a moment, finger-like projections of muscle, papillary muscles attached by tendon-like cords. So that's going to be sort of connective tissue, and this is muscle tissue. Okay, so that combination, papillary muscle, and then these chordae tendineae, will help with the controlling of the valves. Aortic valve here, tricuspid valve here. So aortic valve, tricuspid valve, right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. All right, this is your aorta here. Okay. This is what it looks like when you cut it open in lab. Actually, it'll probably look a little bit better than this in a lab, actually. This because this heart looks a little bit older, a little bit more decay. All right. All right, so blood flow through the heart must occur in only one direction. I talked about that. We don't want blood going backwards. We only want to go in one way. Very important. If your blood starts going in the wrong direction, you can have major issues. What helps it from going in the wrong direction are the valves. Valves prevent blood from flowing backward. You have to have these in your body. Nothing is in, none of this is in your body by accident. So there's no valves needed between the atria and the veins that drain blood into them. Backflow of blood generally does not occur in the veins draining into the atria because there's differences in pressure. So atria are under very low pressure. Most of the blood flowing into the atria, it flows by the help of gravity. So you have sort of an empty space in the atria, blood just flows in just by gravity. That it's not going to go backwards in that sense. So you don't have a valve from the atria, from the vein to the atria, right? But forceful contractions could drive blood backward into the atria and from the ventricles, and this is prevented by the valves between the atria and ventricles, which are the right and left atrioventricular valves, which makes sense. Atria, ventricular, this is the ventricle. AV valves consist of flaps or cusps composed of endocardium. So endocardium is that inner layer of the heart, overlying core of collagenous connective tissue. So endocardium and collagenous connective tissue. The valves are named for the number of cusps. You have the tricuspid valve, which is between the right atrium and right ventricle. You have the bicuspid valve, which is between the left atrium and left ventricle, more commonly called the mitral valve. So just know that they're slightly different just because of the number of cusps. All right, so the tricuspid valve is on the right side. The bicuspid valve, the two cusps, is on the left side. Easy way to remember that. And then you see this chordae tendineae, fibrous tendon-like structures attached to the inferior end of each cusp, attached to the papillary muscles that contract just before ventricles begin injecting blood. It creates tension, keeping the valves closed. So these this chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles contract just before the ventricles begin injecting blood, so sending blood into their respective circuits, and they keep the valves closed so that when the ventricles contract and start pushing blood out, the blood doesn't go back up into the atria. Like I said, once again, we do not want blood to go backwards. You could also have potentially blood leaving the ventricles once it's pumped out it has the potential to flow backwards into the ventricle. We don't want that to happen either. Blood flows backward and ventricles relax as a result of high pressure in arteries and gravity. If you notice, the aorta is sort of above where the left ventricle is, but so that the blood does not flow backwards into your ventricle, we have what we call semilunar. Refers to half moon shape of three cuffs, also composed of endocardium and central collagenous core. So very much similar structure to the inner layer of the heart. And we have the pulmonary valve, which is between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk. So going into the pulmonary circuit, that pulmonary valve prevents blood from going back into the right ventricle. And we have the aortic valve, which is between the left ventricle and the aorta, left ventricle and the systemic circuit, and that's going to prevent blood that's pumped out of the left ventricle from going back into the left ventricle. So the pulmonary valve basically is in the pulmonary circuit, prevents blood from going back into the right ventricle. The aortic valve prevents blood from going back into the left ventricle, right? So you have the atrioventricular valves, which prevent blood, which allow blood to go from the atrium to the ventricles, but not for the ventricles back to the atrium. We don't want that to happen. And then we have these semilunar valves, the pulmonary valve and aortic valve, which once blood is pumped out of the right ventricle or once blood is pumped out of the left ventricle, prevent blood from the pulmonary circuit or the systemic circuit from going back into the right or left ventricle. All right, so the valves play a huge role in that process. And this is just showing you the structure of the atrioventricular valve. Right, so you have the mitral bicuspid, left side, tricuspid, right side, 3 parts, bicuspid, 2 parts, tri is 3, bi is 2. You also have the semilunar valves, aortic between the left ventricle and the aorta, and the pulmonary between the right ventricle and the pulmonary circuit. These are how those valves look. You can, this is a living heart, so that's a little bit differently. You see the open and closed valve, preventing blood versus allowing blood through. You may have heard of diseases of these valves. 2 major issues that can happen are the valves don't close all the way, therefore blood leaks backwards, or calcium deposits in the cuffs makes them hard and inflexible. The valves are not soft, and the structure of the valve is affected because of calcium deposits in there, and blood flow through the valve becomes difficult. The heart has to pump harder to eject blood through it. They don't move as well. So they can either not close all the way and have leaking, or they can become stenotic and not move as well and have issues that way. Both of these issues can lead to what we call heart murmurs, which we can also detect without cutting you open, which is amazing. And maybe somebody who's watching this has experienced some type of heart murmur, or knows somebody who has experienced a heart murmur. Usually that's some type of issue with your valve. You can hear it when you use a stethoscope and listen to somebody's heart. You can hear extra sounds. Doctors are trained to hear exactly. They know what a heart is supposed to sound like. They know how the pump is supposed to sound. The lub dub, we'll talk about that sound a little bit later. They know exactly how the heart's supposed to sound, and when they hear an extra like swooshing sound, you can actually hear when there's extra fluid movement, extra blood movement in the heart. And obviously they would do more tests before they actually tried to treat it, but just by listening to the heart, they can hear that there's an issue with one of the valves. Now we're going to talk about coronary circulation. I mentioned this earlier. This is in relation to the blood supply that is directly to the heart. Remember, the heart is a living organ. The heart also needs blood. And the blood that is being pumped out of the heart, some of that needs to go to the heart. And the blood that is actually in the heart does not supply the heart. Okay, so let me, hopefully that makes sense. The blood in the heart, so in the right or left atria, right or left ventricle, is not providing nutrients for the heart while it's inside the heart. It's, it's in the heart. It's eventually going to be pumped to the lungs or pumped to the rest of the body. So while it is inside the heart, it is not supplying nutrients to the heart. Now, that is why the heart has its own special blood supply. Just like every other part of your body needs its own arteries, your heart does too. The supply of blood directly to the heart, it's called the coronary circulation, right? These are blood vessels specifically for the heart. All right, so we have so at the ascending aorta, so right after you get out of the left ventricle, you get to the ascending aorta, the main systemic artery into which the left ventricle pumps blood. Immediately after the ascending aorta, you have two branches that are the right and left coronary arteries, right? So they travel right and left, atrioventricular. They travel in the right and left atrioventricular sulci. Those are indentations, respectively. And this, you'll see this in the picture, and hopefully it'll make a lot of sense when we see the picture. The right coronary artery travels inferior and laterally along the right atrioventricular sulcus and branches off into many different branches. You don't need to know every single branch, but please read the slide just so you can understand it. And then we have, shortly after the left coronary artery emerges from the ascending aorta, it branches as well. So these right and left coronary arteries then branch into other arteries. You have the anterior interventricular artery, travels along the interventricular sulcus at the apex of the heart. You have the circumflex artery, curves along the atrioventricular sulcus, flexes around the heart. So these different arteries that travel around the heart. And then you have what we call the formation of anastomoses. These words always kind of trick me out. A little background on me. I didn't do well in English classes. I don't know why. Just pronouncing words, writing words. I love, obviously, science, so there's a ton of vocabulary in science, but actually pronouncing and saying words. So the best thing I would say is look it up. Um, you may say, my professor said it like this, and then you hear somebody else say it a totally different way. They're probably right, because my word pronunciation is a little tricky sometimes. But with this, what these structures do, what happens is that your heart makes new blood vessels. So the coronary arteries form anastomoses with one another. They branch from the pericardium, even with arteries from other coronary circulation entirely. They basically form these like other little arteries, and they can basically supply blood, to make sure we supply blood to every part of the heart. Remember, we want the heart is always beating. Whether you're awake or you're asleep, the heart is beating, and so it continuously needs blood supply. Right? These collaterals, these arteries that are created help protect the heart as well, because if any of these blood vessels get blocked, then that part of the heart won't get blood. So we can create these extra branches to sort of continue, extra branches of arteries to continue to supply blood to the heart. Right? So hopefully that makes sense. If not, just shoot me an email or give me a call and we can figure something out. This is the diagram in a little more detail, just showing you Starting from, you see the aortic arch, you see the different arteries that come off and supply blood to the heart. So, circumflex artery, uh, right coronary artery, interventricular artery, supply blood to the heart. The idea is we want to make sure that every part of the heart has a blood supply. The heart is constantly working, it never stops. While you are alive, it's not going to stop. And so it needs nutrients, it needs oxygen, just like any other part of the body. So very important. Um, let's go. As far as veins are concerned, majority of the heart's veins empty into a large venous structure posterior to the heart called the coronary sinus. So just like you have coronary arteries, you have the coronary sinus. You have the coronary sinus receives blood from three major veins: the great cardiac vein, small cardiac vein, middle cardiac vein. Right? They dump blood into what we call the coronary sinus. Just a little more detail about the three different major veins and where they ascend. Great cardiac vein along the anterior interventricular sulcus. The small cardiac vein travels along the right atrioventricular sulcus, and then the middle cardiac vein travels along posterior interventricular groove between the ventricles. Okay, so and these are the veins. So this is all part of the coronary circulation. You have arteries and veins. Obviously, the arteries bring the oxygen and the nutrient-rich blood. The veins will take away the carbon dioxide and any waste products produced and deoxygenated blood. Everybody's probably heard of these issues, but this is why this is so important. Because the coronary circulation supplies blood to the heart, we have you can have major issues when you have plaque, which is a fatty material, and starts to block these arteries. This is why you have the collateral arteries, the anastomoses, and all of that. This is why that's so important, to be able to create these sort of other branches to be able to continue to supply blood to the heart. Because if one of these pathways does get blocked, it can be a major issue. That part of the heart can die, and once that part of the heart starts to die, uh, it doesn't generally come back, right? So we have, if you've ever known somebody with a heart transplant, you know how major these is, or anybody that's had heart surgery in general, you know how major uh, this can be. Any kind of issues with the heart. All right, so you have the potential to have build up of fatty material, which can plaque, which leads to coronary artery disease. So building up of fat in these arteries that supply blood to the heart. Leading cause of death worldwide. Now, this is before COVID, so right now it might be COVID, but in general, coronary artery disease is one of the leading causes of death. The reason why it's so major is, like I said before, when you block arteries to the heart, now the heart starts to die. When the heart starts to die, you start to die. Very simple. Okay, so coronary artery disease decreases blood flow to the myocardium, which is the musculature layer of the heart. And what happens is you get lack of oxygen to the muscle, and you have myocardial ischemia. Um, you generally get uh, chest pain. People grab the chest. That's usually a bad sign. Most dangerous potential consequence is myocardial infarction, which is called a heart attack. I know people say, talk about stroke and cancer and those things, which also are terrible. There's a lot of terrible things that can happen to us, but heart attacks are pretty quick, and when they happen, it is a major problem, right? So basically what has happened, myocardial infarction, uh, plaques in the coronary artery rupture, clot forms, obstructs blood flow to the myocardium, so to the musculature layer of the heart, and that tissue supplied by the artery starts to die. Okay, so that part of your heart, some part of your heart starts to die. That's what leads to a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. It's not good. Symptoms include chest pain, sweating, anxiety, nausea. If you ever feel like you think you might be having a heart attack, or uh, get medical help very quickly. Cardiac, like I said, I was trying to talk about this on a previous slide. Cardiac muscle cells generally do not undergo mitosis. So dead cells are replaced with fibrous, non-contractile scar tissue. So it doesn't get better for you. Once you've had a heart attack, it's usually not good. And you're usually at risk for having more, actually. And so when you have a heart attack, part of your heart starts to die. The other parts of your heart have to work harder. And so it's just not good. So you want to take care of your heart. And how do we do that? By not smoking, eating healthy, trying not to eat fast foods, high foods that are high in fat. There are some things that we can't control. Getting older, um, men are definitely susceptible to this. Women are as well. It could be something that's in your family, genetic history of it. So there's some things you can't necessarily control, but you can control exercise. You can control eating healthy. You can control not smoking. Those are things you can control. Just taking care of yourself. All right. This is a picture of it. You can see they can do an angiography, and they can see. And I'm not going to test you on this, but this is a way that you can actually imaging. And like I said before in the beginning, the fact that we can image things like the heart, we can image the coronary circulation of the heart, it's amazing. And we can see these things. We can diagnose before we even cut inside. You can see where they can actually see where by injecting the dye and imaging these blood vessels of the heart, they can see where the issue is before they cut into you and figure out what they're going to do. And how they would fix it is they do what they call a coronary angioplasty. A balloon is inflated in the blocked artery, a piece of wire mesh, stent may be inserted into the artery to keep it open. So they try to open the artery back up, take a little balloon, put it in there, inflate that, try to open. Remember that artery basically has been blocked, so they're trying to open it back up. They can also do a bypass where other vessels are grafted, and you try to, you hear these things, triple bypass surgery, triple three bypass. Tried to bypass 3 different locations where there may be blockage, things like that. Try to reroute the blood, allow it to go through a different route so that it can still supply parts of the heart with blood flow, with the oxygen and nutrients that are necessary. So it's a lot easier to take care of yourself ahead of time than to go through a heart attack and the recovery from a heart attack, trying to get your body back in a place where it can be useful.